Jessica will say thank you for coming in and telling your daughter's story and your story. And, it's amazing to me to think about the kind of loss that you've been through. And yet I still see you in church praising God, and so I want to get into that. Like, I do want to get into that. But before we get into that, I would like to talk about, just tell me about Jade. Like, everybody who's watching this at this moment probably has no clue what we're getting ready to discuss. But Jade was 11 when she was brutally taken from this world. And we're going to get in. Golly, I told you I'm a sis. But we're going to talk about God's faithfulness and all that. So that's where we're going. But before we get into the bad stuff there, just tell me, what was Jade like? I never got to meet her. So tell me what Jade was like.
She was 11. She was in the 6th grade. She was artistic, very funny, liked to make everybody laugh, big jokester, prankster, animal lover, loved to help out anytime anybody needed help, she loved to help. Very caring and just lit up a room.
Favorite songs or favorite things to do?
She loved Minecraft. That was her big thing, and she was incredible at it. I didn't realize what all it entailed, and she asked me one day, "Mom, you want to see my world?" And I said, "Well, how do you even make one of those?" Because I was like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of cool." And then she showed me, it's, for people who don't know, it's a flat plane, and you build. I mean, she had a whole entire city with shops and castles and businesses and like livestock, and it was like, it blew my mind.
Right.
And she loved it, and she was so good at it. And she loved music. She loved Christian music. She loved she loved Johnny Cash. When she was little, she learned how to sing.
11-year-old.
But even at like, she had an ornament, and it was a Johnny Cash guitar, and when you'd play it, it would play some of the songs. But even at like 2 or 3, she learned how to sing Folsom Prison and would sing it in the car. She had a little bit of a lisp, so it was very cute. Yeah,
that was funny.
Oh yeah, but she big music lover too.
Her teachers, you said she was 6th grade. I wonder if I know her teacher. What was her teacher's name?
Well, so in 6th grade, it was. I don't really know. I don't remember who, because it was only from August to December.
Oh, I got you.
Now, her 5th grade teacher that she loved all of her teachers. Yeah. She went to Lincoln, was Mr. Seekers.
Okay.
And he loved her. Yeah. They were both really disappointed because COVID happened, so she was only in the classroom for that first little chunk. Mm-hmm. And they actually wrote each other. They did with all the students, but they had postcards that they'd written back and forth to each other. So, yeah, she really liked him a lot.
I found out in a lunch meeting with another pastor, you were at First Baptist Marion at the time. Is that correct?
She was.
She was. Okay.
My parents went there, and she went there and was in Awanas, and she loved to go to church. Yeah.
Jade. So I wish I would have met her. And so tell me about your life. Let's talk about you for a minute. What was your life like as a mom of 11-year-old? Working, being a mom, taking her to school. What was your life like? What was, did you and Jade have anything fun you'd love to do together? Or
we like to go have sushi.
Really?
She was really weird. She wouldn't eat chicken unless it was a chicken nugget or chicken noodle soup, but she would eat hummus and sushi, like all the weird stuff. But she was really weird about like a regular hamburger or something.
Yeah.
But she was my little like daredevil. I'd be like, "You want to go eat sushi?" She'd be like, "Yeah, that sounds great." We go have.
So she was at First Baptist. Your mom was there. Tell me about your spiritual life. Tell me about your relationship with God back then.
So I grew up in church my whole life, and I always have felt close to God. Like God's always kind of just had me, whether I really wanted to be or not. I always felt this kind of like, I always said my conscience wasn't my conscience, it was God, because he would kind of tug at me, just in the course of growing up, being an adult, working and doing different things, I didn't have a church life.
Just got distracted. There are people watching today that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I didn't want to have a closer relationship, but I would catch myself going, well, as soon as things calm down, and then I would always get that in the back of my head, like, you can't say that. It has to be, you shouldn't say that,
Right.
And I'd always, push it off. So looking back to where I am now, I see how far I was.
Right.
But at the time it seemed, well, it's just not convenient. Well, it's just not, the excuses we make,
It's kind of like when you go out swimming on the ocean and you're getting out there and you don't realize how far you're off the bank until you do. Then you do, and then you're like, can I get back to the bank? Right? It's a lot like that.
It's not that far.
That is a lot of people's story.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a lot. It's easy to drift away from God. And so, how long have you been at Redemption now?
This Easter, since last Easter.
Okay,
will be a year. Yeah.
All right. And so you had a daughter. She loved Minecraft. You guys seemed to love sushi, having fun. She loved her teachers. I mean, really good person. So what happened? Tell me about how you experienced loss. Tell me about this loss. I know there are 3 big events that happened in how long of a time frame? The 3 big
from
events?
December 5th of 2020 to October 21st of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she'll get into the story in a minute, but you suffered lots of loss. Let's talk about the day that you lost Jade, or even days leading up to that. Tell me about that.
So, her younger sister was about to turn 2, and we were just going to have a family, just like dinner and cake and type thing, because she's 2. And so, since Jade was with her dad, I had told her she had a phone, and I had texted her and said, I'm going to be coming to get you tomorrow at such and such time. Make sure you're up. Make sure you're ready. And she, yeah, Mom, I will. So she actually, there was something at our house that she had forgotten. And so her grandma actually brought her over the night before, which in hindsight, that was the last time I saw her and got to hug her and told her I loved her. And it was like she came in like a whirlwind. She came in, went to her room. I said, where did you come from? What are you doing? She's like, I got to get whatever it was. And then she was back. I said, hey. And she came over and gave me a hug. I said, love you. See you tomorrow. And she said, yeah, love you too, Mom. And she was out the door before, just quick. And so the next day I was getting everything ready. And I said, all right. I hadn't even changed. I was just like, I'm just going to run out there and grab her real quick, because it's like a 10-minute drive, if that. And I had texted her and said, hey, are you ready? And she didn't answer, which was not uncommon. She was an 11-year-old with a phone.
Sure.
And she was...
Or it could be 17 with a phone, or, 39-ish wife with a phone.
Right, yeah. So she, hit and miss. So I had to stop by the post office, and so I sent a message to her dad, and I said, hey, tried to call her, tried to text her, do you know if she's up, what's going on, because, their life's separate from ours, and he said, yeah, I don't know, I'll try to call Julie. And he said, so I came out of the post office, and I was heading that way, and he said, I couldn't get a hold of her, but I'm sure they're up, I'm sure she's ready. Okay.
Julie is stepmom. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Live-in girlfriend, stepmom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially. Yeah. Okay. And so I'm driving out there, and I text her again, and I said, I'm on my way. Answer the phone. A couple minutes went by, and I thought, oh, this kid, girl, And so I finally texted her one more time as I turned onto Norman, and I said, you need to call me ASAP. Because I'm like, we gotta go. Like, this is, So as you turn onto Songbird from Quarry League, where the ball fields are, there's just this tiniest bit of an incline. And it's just enough if you have a lower vehicle that it kind of obscures the rest of the road. As I turned, I could see lights. And I thought, what in the world is that? There's a couple of houses that are a good chunk of distance apart from where they were. And I thought, oh my gosh, I think they're at the neighbor's house. And then in my mind, it was like, gosh, I hope they're okay, you know. And as I go by, I see...
Never dreaming.
No clue. Like seconds away. Had no idea. See one of the cops standing, talking to the neighbors. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay. And as I get up over that hill and I'm looking, I noticed they're at their house. And it was just like everything got sucked out of me because I knew she was there, but I didn't know who else was there. Didn't know if the rest of, her step siblings were there or what. So as I pull in, there's 2 ambulances, several police cars, state and local. They're just everywhere. It's swarming. And I'm like, okay. So my brain instantly goes into, I have to really pay attention to what's happening and I have to stay calm. There's nothing is going to be good if I go in here like going nuts. Like it's not going to solve anything. It's not going to help anything. So I immediately, it's like a pan, like I just pan through everything and kind of take a mental note of like who's where and what's going on. And I approach and there's one of the officers standing there and I said, my daughter is supposed to be here. What is happening? And at the time I don't even think I got there so close to when they got there. If I had not stopped by the post office, I'm pretty sure I would have got there the same time they did. He wasn't even for sure what had happened. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to stand here and wait. But the whole time I'm like, okay, God, I don't know what's going on. You're going to have to figure this out because I can't do anything. My hands are tied, which is the craziest feeling to not be able to just rush in there. I mean,
and they're not letting you go in.
Oh no, they're keeping me way back. Like the yard is pretty deep and I'm not even allowed mid-yard. And so I'm standing there and at some point through all of this, and I don't remember because it's been 4.5 years by now, her dad does show up. His dad shows up. His sister shows up at some point in all this. And I'm like, don't know, what's happening. And then at one point I see them bring her out on the stretcher. Now, I don't know if they didn't cover her because they knew that I was there and they didn't want me to know, or if it was they were just doing everything as fast as they could to get her in the ambulance. So from my point of view, she's still alive.
Yeah. And
now she is incredibly pale. So I know something horrible has happened, but I can't see anything because they have her covered. But I know she is not present. So she just looks really bad at this point. Come to find out, she had been gone for quite some time. Like we're talking 2-3 hours. But
so at this moment you think she's alive and you're hoping she's alive and you think she's alive.
Right.
Are you yelling out to her? Are you trying to get her attention?
No.
What's going on?
No. My brain was like, stay quiet and keep watching. Just observe. Take it all in because it was like God was telling me, you need to pay attention to what is happening. You need to watch who is doing what. You're going to need this. You need to know this information. They put her in the back of the ambulance. The lights are still, they're not sirens, but the lights are still going on. And I just started to praying to God and like almost talking to her, like, you've got to fight. You can do this. You're okay. And it was I don't know how much time went by that later I've kind of reflected. It was like in the back of my mind, I had a gut feeling that she wasn't there, but I was just praying so hard that it was just like, what else can you do?
Yeah. You don't want to believe that that's
right. Exactly. Especially because I have no facts. I have nothing to go on. All I've seen is her. She looks terrible. They've got her in the back of the ambulance. The ambulance is kind of moving because they're in there working, and everybody, the family, his side of the family, and he was there, and we're all just waiting, basically. There was one point where they turned the lights off. I've seen enough. I'm a true crime junkie, which seems odd.
On the way to the hospital, they turned the lights off?
They never left.
Oh.
They never left the property. So when they turned the lights off, I knew. Nobody else put two and two together, but I knew. And so then I just kind of was trying to keep myself calm. And then a couple of the detectives walked over and kind of gathered us. And at that point, they had started to tape off everything. And there were a couple of cars that left. And then the second ambulance left. And so they gathered us all together, let us know what happened, that she was gone, and that they were trying to figure out what had happened. In the midst of all of it, Julie was on the front porch because they were trying to figure out what all had taken place, because it wasn't making sense.
So I want to interrupt you for a minute. Mm-hmm. So a detective comes up, he gathers the family, and he said what?
He said, I hate to tell you, but I have to let you know that she has passed away. They did everything they could, but there was nothing that they could do. So, which at that point, I think is when I realized that what I saw on the gurney, she was gone. Yeah. Because I thought, there's no way that, kids are resilient. They, but I thought, and then in my head, I'm thinking, what happened to her that they couldn't fix? Right. Like what happens to an 11-year-old that you can't get her stable
or get to a hospital and get somebody to work on her?
Yeah, which I totally understand. I was in healthcare for a long time, so yeah, I never thought for a second, like, oh, why aren't they leaving? They got to get them stable before they start driving, so that thought never hit me, but I just thought, what happens to an 11-year-old that you can't do anything? And so once they told us that, they asked us if we would go down, her dad and I, if we would go down to the department so that they could talk to us. And of course, sure. So no, I gotta, so we go, and because he lived there, they talked to him first. So, which is fine because everything was seared into my head anyway. It wasn't going anywhere. But they talked to him for probably, it felt like a lot longer, but I feel like it was like an hour and a half. So I sat in a room by myself for an hour and a half, just like a mess, because I didn't know.
Did you ride with the officer there? Did you follow him there?
We rode with, they wouldn't let us take our vehicles. So we rode, and I honestly, it's so weird because I thought I would never forget. I don't remember if they rode us together or if they rode us separate. Yeah. Because at that point I was still trying to make mental notes of like everything that I saw and when I saw them take her, because they took her either right before or right after they brought her out and put her in the ambulance. I want to say it was after they brought her out. They went ahead and put her in a car, and that's one of the cars that I saw leave. And so when they got us there, and when it was finally my turn, they were when he first asked me if I had any idea, I said, no, nobody could tell me anything. So what happened? And he said that she had been stabbed. He wasn't clear on how many times, where, but that it obviously was fatal. And that could I think of anyone that would want to, and my initial reaction was, no, she's 11.
Yeah.
Who wants to hurt an 11-year-old? And he said, so then he asked me, do you think that anybody that she was with could have? And I said, I would never want to think that, but I'm going to tell you that if there was only one other person in the house, then clearly something needs to be looked into.
Yeah. Because
that would make sense to me. Now, do I think, can I rationalize that? No, because they've been in each other's lives for 7 years.
Right.
So what changed all of a sudden to be, to have this happen? But if the clues and the evidence are pointing towards it, I was like, then I have to believe the evidence. And if that's where it's pointing, then I would say, then that's what happened. And he was like, okay, they wouldn't tell me a whole lot, which obviously they couldn't.
Right.
And it was so fresh and
Right.
knew they couldn't, So a couple days, either the next day or a couple days later, we were back up there again. We were at the courthouse this time, or at the county, the county. Because at first they took us to the Marion Police Department, but then we ended up at the Sheriff's Department and talking to the detectives, and they were trying to just get background, what could have transpired, what was going on, all these things.
Was that Sheriff Diedrich back then, or was it Benny Vick? It would have been Benny Vick. I
It
think.
would have been, yes,
Yeah,
it would have been
several
Vic.
years ago.
So we had Geitman and Gusentine that were the main lead detectives. And they called me, texted me, they kept me in the loop because I told them, I was like, you got to keep me informed. I mean, obviously I don't expect you to tell me things that are sensitive. I would never want to jeopardize anything, but I was like, you got to give me something because it's eating me up. I got to know, And so they would keep me updated, like, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're looking for this.
So when you leave the police department, what do you do then?
So when I initially left the police department that night, that first night, I called my dad and I was like, you come pick me up. And we ended up going and picking up my car. And I got home and I just remember going in. Everly was, just turned 2 and she was asleep. And I sat in the rocking chair holding her for a couple hours, just kind of turned off, just not numb, but just I had to mentally just turn my brain off because I just could not fathom what had just happened.
How did you tell your dad? Did he know already?
He did, because whenever I got there, I called him and let them know. They actually went ahead and drove up to the hospital so that someone was there because at the time we thought, she got hurt. Yeah. And so once Carl and Cindy came and told us, that she was gone, I called him and said that was the case, but that I had to go to the police department and talk to them. And he said, well, just let me know and I'll come get you. And I said, okay.
And so what's day 2, 3, what's day 10 like? You know what I'm saying? The first week after that. You don't know what's happened to her for a while, I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to adjust to, you don't have this little girl that you've loved and brought into this world. And
yeah. And her little sister is, she was with us for a week and not with us for a week. That's how her father and I had always done the custody arrangement because that's just what worked for us and what she loved. She enjoyed it. So her sister was used to going to the door sometimes and saying, "Sissy, Sissy," and her not answering. So for the longest time, we just said, "Sissy's not here," until she she's very smart. Mm-hmm. And even then, one day she went and knocked and I said, "Sissy's not here." And she looked at me like, "You've been saying that for a while," at 2. And so it got to the point where we finally had to just start telling her, "Sissy's with Jesus, Sissy's in heaven," because it was like she knew something. There had been far too much time in her tiny mind that had gone by that she didn't see her. And Jade was always very involved with her, always out messing with her, playing with her, all this stuff. So even at 2, she understood something was odd. And she noticed, like everybody's kind of sad, everybody's kind of quiet, stuff like that.
They
so
know things
she
are
knew.
wrong. Yeah.
She knew. Yeah.
She doesn't even today know really what happened. She's still pretty young, right? Is that correct? So she doesn't really know what happened at this moment.
No.
And so how long before you were told there's an arrest been made and now we have a guilty party? Like we're going to aim this investigation
Day 5.
Day 5, they make an arrest.
They do. And they were waiting on some preliminary stuff to come back. But day 5 we did. So it happened on the 5th of December and her funeral was on the 11th. And it just so happened so we held her funeral at the church, which is right across the street from the courthouse. And it just so happened that she was arraigned during Jade's funeral. Mm. So, and that was...
Otherwise, she would have been there.
Otherwise, the church had security in place to make sure that...
Because you knew something was up with her. You knew before the charges came in.
Yes. Once...
You didn't know how or why, and you probably still don't know the why.
No, I'll never know the why. And even if I did it to us, it would not make sense. Right. And so I don't even look for the why because it's not going to do anything.
So she's arraigned.
Yes.
You have a funeral.
Yep.
Rose Hill Cemetery?
Yep.
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 You go home from that. Now we've got somebody who did this. They've been arrested, and now there's a trial. That trial goes 3 years?
2.
It
years? Was almost 2. Yeah, so February of 22. Yeah. February 22.
Do you learn things in the courtroom about what happened to her, or is that something you learn ahead of time?
So they called in, they ended up calling in a special prosecutor, and she is amazing. And she and I spent a lot of time talking and going over things. I always told her, don't sugarcoat it. Whatever it is, tell me. Don't try to think you're making it easy on me. Just tell me. Whatever it is, be honest with me. And I told her, because she would always get upset because it was continued this. We didn't have that, blah, blah, blah. And she would just always apologize. I'm so sorry this is taking. And I said, I don't care if this takes 10 years. Mm-hmm. And she kind of looked at me and I said, I want it done right. I don't want it done fast. I would rather take the time and gather every single possible thing that is available that we need to secure this conviction the first time and be done. I don't care how long it takes. And I said, I don't care if there's anybody else in the family that's throwing a fit. Mm-hmm. I don't care. I want it done right. And if we rush, if mistakes are made, that I'm not going to be okay with that. And she would always tell me that I was one of the most patient moms that she'd ever dealt with. And I said, where am I rushing to? What's happening? Right. What do I have to do? Right. I was like, getting a conviction is not going to bring her back. So all I have is time. I was like, and she sits there and waits. So I said, in my mind, she's already started her sentence because I know she's going to be convicted because the evidence shows that it's her, you know. So.
And so any chance that people don't know the story, any chance that this was an accident, any chance that, you know, she turned the corner, there was a knife, she ran into it, any chance like that?
No. About 6 months before all of this happened, there had been an increase in sex trafficking in our area. And one day after I had picked Jade up from school, she said, "Mom, what is sex trafficking?" Wow. And I said, "What?" Yeah. And she asked again, and I said, "Where did you hear that?" And she said, "Well, I heard it on the news, and then somebody at school was talking about it." And I said, "Well," and I, 11-year-old, yes, explained to her what it was. Yes. She said, "Well, what do I do if somebody," and I said, "Okay." I said, "I know I always tell you, keep your hands to yourself, and you don't start anything." I always gave her permission to finish it, but you don't start it. And I said, "But I'm going to tell you, if anyone, I don't care if they're a perfect stranger or if you know them, if they are trying to hurt you or take you somewhere that you know you shouldn't be," I said, "you kick, bite, scratch, scream, claw, you do whatever you have to do." And she kind of had this wild look in her eyes, and I said, "If something happens to you, you either need to leave some of your DNA on them or you need to take some of theirs with you so that we can figure out what happened." She was a nail biter, so she did not have fingernails to speak of. But during the autopsy, when they did the fingernail scraping, they found DNA. They found Julie's DNA under her barely there fingernails. She had been bit. Now they can't.
Julie had been bit?
Julie had been bit. Tried to say she was a self-biter, but there was no physical way she could have done it. When they did the impressions, now this part of the evidence isn't admissible in court. There was some ruling somewhere else where it basically if you can't say 100%, you can't use it. But Jade had recently lost a couple of teeth. One was half grown, one was not. And in the impression, it is obvious,
very clear,
that it's hers.
So she was fighting for her life.
I know from some of the officers that I've talked to, and then going over the case after it was closed with Jen, our prosecutor, she went all through that house. The crime scene was massive. It was through the entire house. She tried to get out.
This 11-year-old tried to run away from her murderer.
She tried to get out both doors. Stabbed. Yep, she tried to get out the front door, the back door. There was even handprints where she tried to grab and swing around a corner. She tried to hide in the bathroom, which is where it ultimately ended. And I think at that point it was just because she'd lost so much blood.
Yeah, so for somebody who doesn't know this, she was stabbed over 100 times.
There were over 100 injuries to her body. If I'm thinking correctly, 22 of them were massive. Yeah. 4 of them, again, if I'm remembering right, were fatal. I don't think that they ever said that they knew which one was, because it was just the blood loss was so great and so quick. So yeah.
I think about losing an 11-year-old. It's one thing to lose them. It's another thing to lose them in that manner. And so this murder, Julie. She is now incarcerated for how long?
86 years. Or I'm sorry, 58 years. She'll be 86.
58 years she's incarcerated in the penitentiary, and she'll be out at 86 years old. Is that justice?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of people got upset. A lot of people messaged me, I can't believe they didn't give her life. And I said, guys, think about it.
Yeah.
86 years old
And
in
her
prison.
whole life is gone.
That's your whole life. I said, what is she going to do at 86 hobbling out of prison? I said, if she makes it to 86, let her out. Good for her, you know? I said, yes, it's justice because she has children. I don't get to watch my child grow up. She only gets to see it through videos and pictures and phone calls.
Right.
For me, it is.
And so, so she's locked away. You're now trying to get life. It's never going to be normal,
Right.
but you're trying to be a mom to Everly, and you're trying to move on. And people come up and say probably some of the dumbest things. People don't know what to say in those moments.
Right.
But that's not the end of your story of loss.
No.
It's just not. And I'd love to be able to say it was, but it floored me when you sent me an email telling me about all these things and how God moved in all of those. And so, how long from the time Jade died to the time your dad, help me understand your dad. Your dad, did he go into a procedure or something?
He had a small procedure, like an outpatient procedure, it was in the middle of March. He never comes out of anesthesia well. He never has. He's goofy. He never could do pain medicine. He just, like a Looney Tune. He can't do it. So he always had trouble coming out of anesthesia. But this time when he got home, it almost seemed like he had like an upper respiratory, coughing a lot, chills, just felt really bad. And we always knew that there was something that would go on, because in the summertime, as he got older, especially if he got too hot, he would kind of, he'd have to come in and cool down. He'd have a hard time getting himself, he'd almost crap out type thing. He'd passed out multiple times throughout his life from overheating and stuff like that. So they always kind of knew something, but they never could pinpoint what it was. Just random tests, they would just, everything looks normal. Your labs look normal. So, but then he went in for this procedure, and when he came out, he didn't bounce back. He didn't get better. And he's stubborn as a boar.
Doesn't want to go to the doctor.
Didn't want to go.
His last name's not Smith, is it?
No, but he just, I'd be like, Dad, just go get checked out, something, and he's like, I'll be fine, whatever.
But
okay.
he wasn't, and
he
so he gets
wasn't.
back in the hospital.
A family friend of ours finally came over and convinced him, because they were just on him, like, you look terrible. You're freezing cold, you're coughing your head off, you can't breathe, So he goes into the hospital. His O2 sats are trash, but he's fine. But he should not be fine, but he is. And they're working him up. He's in Heron, so they're working him up, trying to figure out what is happening. And they put him on oxygen because his O2 sats are so crappy. They actually put him on the mask because the cannula wasn't raising it enough. And they because he looked like a mixture between Phil and Cy Robertson with the mountain man beard. So they had to tape the mask down to help it stay on. And I was on the phone with my mom, and he kept saying his nose was running, it was itching, he needed to take the mask off. And I heard him, and I said, you tell him not to take that off, let the nurses take it off so that they can put it right back on. Call them.
Right.
And so she did, and Mom said, well, I'll let you go and I'll call you in a little bit. It wasn't 10 minutes later. She called and said, you're going to have to get up here. And I said, what? I just talked to you. They came in, took the mask off. He blew his nose, got into a coughing fit, and immediately just started coughing up copious amounts of blood. So they couldn't get it to stop, so they had to intubate him and knock him out. And they were trying to figure out where this blood was coming from. He just all of a sudden, massive lung bleed. And they were like, what in the world? So they get him stable enough. They fly him to Carbondale. They get him in Carbondale, and they're running every test known to man. They're trying to figure out what's going on. And they were like, has he ever had an autoimmune? And I was like, we don't know. And so I start telling the nurse, this is what's happened to him over the years. This is kind of what, So they test him for these last two extremely rare autoimmune. She was like, we had to get permission because they just don't do it. And it came back that he had GPA, which is granulomatosis with polyangiitis. Basically means his own antibodies turn against him and start attacking his tissues. They like it's easy for them to attack the small fragile tissues, so it goes for your kidneys and your lungs first because those tissues are the same. Very fatal. And extremely. Yeah. Most of the time it is, unless they catch it extremely early. So it either shows up when you're a kid or after 60. And my dad was 62. He had just turned 62 in January.
So you hear this news, you know the end for him is coming?
We didn't know at first because when they put him in the coma and they got him to Carbondale and they figured out what it was, they were like, well, we can't do anything. So they flew him to St. Louis. So Mom and I get in the car, we go to St. Louis, and for a few days they are running dialysis. They did a procedure to stop the bleeding. His lungs started to look a little better, and they were trying to fix his plasma levels and doing all of this stuff, pumping him full of medicine and all these things. And he's on a vent, like they're trying to do all this stuff. And so Mom's there, she's talking to him every day. How are we looking today? What does this look like? What's going on? She would call me since I had the medical thing so I could tell her what was happening.
How long was he up there?
So he went in 22nd, and then the morning of April 9th is when he passed. Yeah.
That was quick.
2 weeks. Yeah, it was 2 weeks. On the 6th or the 7th, Mom was home to change out suitcase and all that, and I was going to take her back up, and she said, I just don't see him getting any better. I just don't. And she said, he's swollen. She said, if he woke up now, he'd be so mad. He would be livid. And I said, okay, well, let's talk to him one more time when we go back up there in the morning, and we'll see what they think. How long, do you think you're going to be able to get him back? What do you think? What do you? And so we went and we talked to them, and it wasn't but a few minutes. They were talking about him being in a nursing home and all this stuff. And Mom and I just shook our head and we said, no.
Yeah.
Nope. He would have a conniption fit. My dad was a tinker guy, piddle around, Mr. Fix-It. If he didn't know how to do something, he'd YouTube it.
Right.
Go get this tool, do this. I mean, so if he couldn't do anything for himself, absolutely not. Yeah. So we told them, and they said, my dad, he wanted to donate his body to science, which several years ago he had said that, and I was like, are you crazy? Why would you want to do that? And he was like, what am I going to do with it? Very dry sense of humor, very funny, very quick-witted. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I don't need my body anymore. I ain't going to be in there. What do you want me to do with it? And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? He said, live? And I was like, okay. And I looked at Mom and I said, are you hearing this? And she's like, well, yeah, we kind of want to do the same thing. And I said, You guys, the idea of it just, I could not fathom at the time. So I called around and found this place that would take him. And I said, listen, this is the situation. This is what we're doing. Great place. So glad we did. And so we told them, and they said, okay, well, we're going to turn off the life support, and, it should be pretty quick. And so they pull the tube out, they turn down all the medicines, the sedation, and they give him the first pump of morphine. And because at this point we're hospice, we're comfort measures, and we both, say our goodbyes. And I told him, go find Jade. And we're thinking, minutes. Well,
I don't know if y'all heard that, but she said, go find Jade.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go find Jade.
Yep. Which I knew that would be his first pit stop.
Yeah.
So my dad is ornery. He did not go, like they said. He came to, and we were like, like, okay. So we sat there for like 5 or 6 hours talking to him. Now he was completely out of it.
Right. Didn't
make any sense, was saying the funniest things. But for those like 5 or 6 hours, we got to sit and talk to him and do, and so they asked me about the morphine, and I said, listen, he's not in the headspace to be able to tell anybody that he's hurt, and I can only tell from his face. I said, just routine.
Yep.
Whether he looks like he needs it or not, just hit the button, just do it. And so when we left, my dad would always do these little like these little ditties in his head. So when Mom and I decided to leave because he was getting sleepy, and I said, okay, Dad, we're gonna go. I'm gonna take Mom to go. She needs a nap. I'm gonna take her. And he's like, well, let's go. And I said, well, you're already comfortable here, so we're gonna go to the other room, and we'll be back, in a couple hours. Okay. And when we left, he was doing some little song in his head. I have no idea. So we go back to the hotel room, and then we get up early the next day. And when I walked in, I could tell that he had switched. Worked in a nursing home for a long time, so you can always tell when the transition happens. And we were maybe in there with him for 30 minutes or so. And I asked them to leave the monitor on so that I could watch. That way I would know when. And so we sat there, like I said, maybe 20, 30 minutes. And Mom had went to the head of his bed and told him that because it had been cloudy and raining and gross outside. And this was the first day. It was like springtime and sunshine and all that. So she told him that it was a beautiful day outside. Talk about Jay all day long. Can't talk about my dad.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he went. And it was really peaceful. So
I went to find Jade.
Yeah. So after that, the body donation people came after a couple hours, and they're really awesome. So he did the donation. They about a few weeks afterwards, they actually send their remains back in this really pretty like cylinder container, and a legacy letter. And it listed and it was just a small list of 10 different things that he got to be a part of. Some of it was new medicine, some of it was surgical procedures, some of it was teaching residents how to perform certain heart cath new procedure things. Super cool that they do that. And so we got that back. I told Mom, I said, well, where are you going to put him? She said, well, I'm going to put him in the bathroom. So he lived in the bathroom on top. And I said, well, that's only right. He's going to be in the bathroom.
That's awesome. So now Jade's gone.
Yep.
Your dad's gone.
Yep.
Does your mom move back in with you?
So what had originally happened is the house I grew up in was pretty big. Mm-hmm. So I was there, and my brother was actually there as well. It was like, I don't even remember what the show, but it was back in the day where it was good night, Mom, good night, Bill, good night. Yep. Yeah, it was like that. Yeah. So, so from April through till about that, so we did a Christmas, and I became kind of like the man of the house type thing. Tried to do all the stuff that Dad would do, and I'd be like, I don't know, but he taught me how to be a man, you know what I mean? So I can take care of certain things, and I'm just like him. If I don't know how to do it, I YouTube it, figure it out, It wasn't a week after I was cutting something was rusted and I couldn't get it apart, so I went in his building, got a butane torch, and my mom came out and she was like, okay. She's like, there he is, and I was like, what? She was like, you're your dad. And I was like, yeah, okay, So just trying to keep everything together and keep Mom from having to worry about stuff. And
so at the house that night, there's coming another big loss.
Yeah.
A big life change, and I guess a loss. But you have your mom, Everly, yourself at home.
And because my brother had moved out a few months prior to. He actually moved out the month in May after Dad passed. So it was just, me, Mom, and Everly.
And so you go to bed that night?
Well, Mom had moved out.
Okay.
So Mom had decided that it just wasn't the same. She just couldn't.
Her husband wasn't there.
Right. So she had found an apartment next to her parents, and it was a great setup. Mm-hmm. Everybody was all nearby each other. It was really great, and it was really good for Everly. So helped get her moved out, and so I was just going to rent the house from her because my childhood home. Why not? You know. She moved out. Her lease started October 1st. So she was in there October 1st. And everything was fine. Everything was going great. We went to bed on October 20th. And then about 1:15 or so, 1:40 something, somewhere in there. In the morning, I heard she had a German Shepherd named Blue, and he stayed with us because obviously she couldn't have pets, but definitely couldn't have a giant German Shepherd in her apartment. So he stayed with us, and I had a little Boston mix. She had a bunch of other stuff in her little dog Ivy that was mine. And I wake up and I hear Blue I've never heard a dog make a noise like that, ever. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is he doing? Right. And at this hour, what is happening? Right. So get up, throw my glasses on, grab my phone, because I'm, flashlight bumbling through the house to get on the other side of the house. And Everly's in there with me. Because the rooms are big, so it's big enough for her to have. And ever since Jade, I don't let her out of my sight. Like, that's just the thing. It's, she's what I got. And so I open the door, and just this giant plume of black smoke just hits me in the face. And I slammed the door back, and I was like, what is happening? And I was like, are you kidding me right now? So I'm like, okay. So fast forward, we get out. Because I just had to shut my eyes and let God guide me to the door. I mean, we're right by the door, but just to get out, because I knew that if I tried to be present, I would get overwhelmed. but it was like 10 feet from the front door. And I was like, all right, God, I'm taking a deep breath and I'm opening the door and I'm shutting my eyes and you're going to have to get me out of here. That's just what we're going to have to do. And so opened the door, got out. And as soon as I felt the cold air on my face, I was like, okay, so I opened my eyes and was out. And so I get her, put her in my car because it's cold out. And I stand back and I'm trying to figure out, because I'm still like, what is going on? And then I can see like a glow. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So call fire department. Within minutes, not even minutes, probably maybe 2 minutes, the whole roof is just up. It's just going. By the time they got there, because I talked to one of the firefighters afterwards, and he told me that, because I said, how long did it take you guys to get there? He said, under 5 minutes. And he said, by the time we got there, it was gone. We knew. And he said, I have not fought that hot of a fire in a long time.
So complete loss?
Complete. Yeah. Yeah.
So you and Everly escaped.
Yep.
Now, in just a short matter of time, you have lost a daughter to murder. A dad had a rare disease and he died unexpectedly. And now the very place you live and everything you own, other than a car, all gone. But you have Everly and you have your mom.
Yep.
And, you know, when I think about that, I think about, that's a lot for anybody to go through. You mentioned earlier at the very beginning, you said you knew that you needed to be closer to God, but you weren't close to Him. That He spoke to you, that He would draw you, and you would acknowledge those things, but you just weren't where you need to be. When in this, I mean, literally like life of loss, just one right after another, when did it finally hit you? Hey, I need to come back to faith. I need to come back to Jesus. I need to focus on God. When did this happen?
Honestly, right after Jade.
Yeah.
Because the thought is always, and I found a lot of people around me doing this, the shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, but why? Why would you sit there and think like that? I mean, I get it. You know, in the beginning, you're like, well, is there anything I could, but once you've answered all those questions, once you've checked all those boxes, and you did not see it coming, you could not have seen it coming, there was nothing you can do to stop it, you didn't stop it, you have to move on. That's easier for some people. It's not easy for some people, and I respect that. Right. I completely understand that not everybody is going to grieve the same, have the same thought process, but I know that because of how I am and how my brain works, God did that for me because I am a dweller. And I know that I would have eaten myself alive trying to figure out, and it was just this weird piece that was just like, there's nothing you could have done, keep going. And I thought, and that was like him like, you know, and I was like, okay, you know, and I thought, all right, now I have to really be proactive with all of this and try to think logically and be very factual about how I go through this process, because it's not going to do me any good to have a pity party. Now, that's not to say that there weren't days that I allowed myself to grieve. You have to.
Yeah.
But I couldn't sit in it. For me, it wasn't doing anything productive for me to just sit in it. I had Everly to keep happy and taken care of and to keep going for. And then after Dad, taking care of Mom. And I even remember telling somebody after Dad, I said, gosh, I was like, I feel like Job. And now I had not ever fully read the entire book, except when I was younger, and it was the kid version, you know, the preteen version of what, you know, what that's all about. So when I read the whole thing, I was like, oh wow, okay,
this happens, and
that's
it pretty much happened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when the fire happened, while I was, watching my entire childhood, I remember going, what do you want? What else do you want? Like, and I wasn't mad. I wasn't mad at God when Jade died. I wasn't mad at God when Dad died. I wasn't mad at God when the fire happened. I was just, what more do you want? What am I supposed to do? What are you trying to tell me? And I was like, did I do something? And I don't like to think that way, like I'm getting punished. But I was like, what is the point? What are you trying to say? And then it was just, after all of that, I was just like trying to get through every day. Went back to work. They thought I was crazy. Went back to work after Dad. They thought I was nuts. Went back to work after the fire. I was like, well, what am I going to do? Just sit there? I can't just sit there. I got to be busy. I got to help people. I got to do things. I got to be a team member and a coworker to my, and friends. And, I got to be active, keep my mind going, and Mom had started going with Cindy. Cindy and my mom have been friends for...
Cindy Absher?
Yeah, have been friends for eons. I've known Cindy since I can remember.
So your mom and Cindy started coming to Redemption Church, and Easter's approaching.
Yeah.
And so tell me about that service. Tell me about walking into church after all of that loss. God's tugging at your heart, and you walk into Redemption. What does God say something to you? Tell me about that experience.
So a couple weeks prior, my mom had kind of been like, hinting like, oh, they have an early service that we go to, and it's, you're done by like 10:30, and that's, perfect for nap time and like forever, kind of like trying to like,
right.
These are all the pros of,
right.
All that. And I'm like, yeah, because at this point I'm with her, like I'm living with her.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. Just kind of whatever. And so Easter's coming up, and I was like, I'm going to be that person that's like, oh yeah, I'll go to church on Easter. It's the only time I go. On Easter and Christmas. And I thought, and then that's when it kind of like started to kind of pick at me. I'm like, I became that person. I was like, and that's when I was kind of like, okay. I always kept myself kind of like you talked about last night, the box. Not arrogantly, but just misinformed in my brain, like, oh, yeah, it's fine. Well, no, I was just like somebody that, and here I am fighting with myself. Am I going to go to church on Easter Sunday with my mom?
Right.
Get real. Like, yeah, you're going to go. So I started asking her, I'm like, all right, so if I go, I was like, what is it like? What do you like about it? Is there anything you don't like about it? Like, what, and she said, well, it's very contemporary, so I think you'll like that, because she knows me and Dad would rattle the house with the music. She's like, sometimes it's a little loud, but I'm getting used to it. And I was like, okay. we come from hymnals,
right.
and the pews, and you may get a quiet little from time to time.
She was saying, hey Jessica, it's going to be different.
Yeah, she's like, there's some, they're lively, and I was like, okay. And I thought, well, I mean, if Cindy likes it and Mom likes it, okay, And I said, well, is it like, what's Robbie like? What, who all's there? So she starts explaining, and she said, it's very laid back. It's very, just, and I said, well, what am I wearing? Like, are we like gussying up? Like, she was like, no. She's like, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. It sounds like my kind of place. It's not that I don't like to get dressed up, but it always rubbed me the wrong way that it felt like you had to.
Right.
Anywhere that I had went, it was like, well, you have to be. Right. Listen, you go to bed at night and pray to God in your pajamas. I really doubt he cares. You're coming in jeans and a t-shirt. You're physically there. That's the point. And so I was like, okay.
Was your first day Easter or first?
It was Easter. It was Easter. She wanted me to go before. Yeah. But I was like, no, I'll go on Easter.
Okay. So you show up on Easter, but you never stop coming.
No. No, I've missed a couple due to illness, and that drove me crazy. No, I came and I just, at first I was like, oh wow, because I've never had that experience before. And then Robert got up there with Kyle and all of them in the band, and I was like, and then they played a song I recognized, and I was like, oh, okay. And there was just, and I thought, okay, Easter service is one thing. Mm-hmm. So that's why I came back the next week, because I wanted to see what it was really like.
It's going to suck the next week. Yeah, I'm going to see.
Well, because I'm like, churches always put on their best show for Easter, Easter and Christmas are the big ones that everybody's like, this is our time, And I thought, no, I need to see what a normal service is like. And so came the next week, and Everly really liked it. And I was always nervous about stuff like that with her, because I didn't know if she would do, because she'd just been with me, And she really loved it. And I remember sitting there on the next Sunday after, and I was like, wow, I've never felt like this before. I've never had this kind of like connection. I've never felt this way. And even, like I said, I grew up in church, in the youth group, and doing all the trips and all the things, and it just never, and I know, as you get older, things are different, but I was like, this feels legit to me.
And so when you started coming, you started hearing from God, talking to God?
So music's always a big thing. Mm-hmm. It always has been. So kind of rearranged my playlist a little bit, started listening to more, and that's primarily all I listen to now. But there were a few songs that I heard that just really spoke to me, on my playlist, and then at church that, playing the same songs. And I thought, this is saying exactly what I feel like in my head, like what it feels like, and there are other people, maybe not in the sequence that it happened to me, but it's not lost on me that there are other people that have it way worse than me.
Right.
So I know I'm not the only one that's alone, but sometimes if you're the only one within your group, it is lonely sometimes, because they try their best to understand, but they can't fully.
Sure.
So to have that music is kind of a therapy, so that's, and then after that, we kept coming and kept coming. Everly went to her first Bible school, and now she likes to stay in the, as she calls it, the aquarium. Yep. She stays in the sanctuary. What she does, she comes to the sanctuary. Yeah. She'll go to kids' church every once in a while, but she really likes being. But music is the same for her. She does. Yeah. She loves it.
She is my buddy.
Yeah.
So there's this story of faith, of healing, kind of moving forward in your life. Faith is obviously guiding you now. You talked about connecting with Job. I want to read a passage. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. When you sent me an email, you summarized those three events, and you reconciled where God was at in all of those events. And if I remember correctly, this is kind of how you summed it up. If Jade would have lived after being stabbed multiple times, over 100 times, she would have had mental issues, she would have had emotional issues, she would have had health challenges. Her quality of life would have been very low.
Yes.
So it's far better for her to be with Jesus.
Absolutely.
Your dad, no one expected that. That came out of nowhere. Yet God literally gave you 6 hours to have fun with your dad before he went home.
Yeah.
And then the night that your house burnt and you lost your child at home and you lose everything, you're standing out there and you're talking to God. What's this about? But at the end of the day, you've came to realize that God is still good and he's still faithful. And your words, if I understood them correctly, were, had my daughter not Had my daughter survived, she would have been in that house when it burned down. Had my dad survived, he would have been in that house when it burned down. And there's not a single way I could have got my mom, my dad, and both my daughters out of that house before it went to the ground.
Nope.
And you said God rescued my dad and rescued my dad and my family from this tragic death, burning in flames, which is exactly what Jesus Christ did for us. Nailed on a cross, put in a tomb. 3 days later, he rose from the dead, so that if we put our faith and trust in him, we don't have to be separated and go into the lake of fire and have eternal torment, right? I think it's amazing. What advice would you give a mother who has lost her child or a father who has lost their child? What advice would you give to them as they're trying to rationalize or make sense or just move forward? What advice would you give if you had a little bullet list, a thought or two maybe?
Don't lose hope.
Yep.
Don't beat yourself up. It's not your fault. Give yourself the grace to grieve, but don't assume that that's just your life now. It does get better. Don't feel guilty when you do catch yourself having a happy moment. That was one thing that was really hard, was finding myself in a comical moment and then being like, in the back of my head, having that little whisper of, how can you be happy? How can you be, you have to learn to just turn that off. If you don't have a church family, get one. Or at least somebody that is in church around you, because that support system you're going to need it.
That's some good advice. Last question for you. I know by talking about her tonight is a way of honoring her. But what do you do? Is there anything you do to remember her, to honor her annually, regularly, daily? I mean, what's the... I've never lost like that. So I'm just curious, how do you, in the moving forward with faith, with trusting God, with not allowing yourself to be guilty, is there a way that we can honor Jade or that you honor Jade?
I have we had pins made whenever the trial was coming up. So I have a pin that's pinned to a necklace that has her name on it. It's a little angel that has her name on it, which I had years before, and then found it after she had passed and thought, that's fitting,
There you go.
So that hangs in my rearview mirror with that picture of her, so I see her every day. That's awesome. Then, so since Everly's birthday is the day before the day that she died, Everly's birthday is her birthday, and that is a fun, exciting, happy day. And then the next day is Jade's day. And that's the day that if you need to get sappy, you need to get upset, or you feel like you just want to crawl in a hole for a couple hours or go put flowers out at her tombstone or, whatever, that's the day for that. But they get separate days. So, and she goes out there with me and knows exactly, she gets out of the car, knows exactly where to run to, runs right up there, hello, sissy, and because we have a picture of her on her stone. So she runs up there and she'll mess with her little things that she has, and she knows,
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I thank you for sharing your story. It is an amazing story. I mean, really, of God's grace through tragedy. God's not just a God on sunny days. He's the God 24/7. He really is near those who are brokenhearted, and he does hear our cries. And in every step of the way, I know that he's just drawing you closer and closer to him. So, thank you.
Thank you.